So even though we are inside this morning, we were supposed to be outside. And typically, when I do things outside, it's a different setting. It's a different vibe. And so I prepare a more sit-down kind of message. Knowing that half of you are going to be about 150 feet away, not going to hear anything I say anyways, so it's less important that I have a real good train of thought. And I've traditionally called them sit-down messages, and even though we're here this morning and not outside, it's a sit-down message, all right? So it's going to be less perhaps coherent, with a lot more ums and ahs. And I know y'all don't like it when people repeat themselves up here, but who knows? I may say things twice. I don't know. We will just see. So we're looking at Psalm 119 this morning. Famous psalm. It is the longest psalm that exists. It is actually the longest chapter in the Bible. Okay, it's 176 verses. It's what's called an acrostic, and the author of the psalm, you read Hebrew from right to left, and so the author of the psalm took the it actually is a psalm, took the Hebrew alphabet, which is 22 letters, and wrote 8 verses for every single one of those letters. And the section of the psalm that we're looking at this morning, 105 through 112, is the nun, N-U-N letter, right there in the middle of the Hebrew alphabet. And it's talking about the Word of God being, of course, as we've said over and over this morning, a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. And thank you very much, Dennis, for that. Right back at you. And it is a verse that is quite literally not meant to read in a room like this. It's meant to read outside. It is meant for people who are very aware of living in a world of darkness and needing to walk paths either in the early morning or even in the dark. And so the psalmist uses that imagery to talk about the Word of God. The Hebrew word is devar, and it actually translates better as the matters of God, the speeching of God, the things of God, really the idea of the presence of God in one's life, and that devar, that rhema, spoken word, becomes a guide, a light unto one's feet, a lamp. Actually, the lamps of that day weren't like the lamps that we have, unless you live sort of in an old order home. They certainly weren't like this, right? But they were a lamp to one's feet. They were clay jars with olive oil in them and a wick. And the psalmist says it's the matters of God, the things of God, the spoken presence of God in the psalmist's life is like a lamp onto their feet and a light to the path. And so the idea is that it would just sort of, as they walked down the path, it would illuminate the path, and the psalmist talks about, a very hard life that he was living, snares and traps and people, wanting to devour his life. And I understand that feeling. Certainly have understood that feeling very much in the last days. I told you last week, my father passed away. And wow, really put some stumbling blocks in my path and in my life and in my joy and celebration. Typically a very exciting person. Preachers used to say that when they would preach this message, that the folks would actually tie these clay jars on their feet so that they could walk the paths and see. And folks believed them, but that's just stupid. Because, I don't know if you've ever tried to carry a lantern filled with hot oil and burning wicks and walk. Just so you know, it doesn't work real well. You'd be burning yourself all up. So it's imagery, it's not real, but the idea is real. And the actuality of that leading us and guiding us and making it so that we're not falling into holes or falling into traps or taking the wrong path. That is what I have found over the years, that God's matters, God's things, God's spoken words in my life, and like the children's story, like Carol was saying, what we learn about God and the way God works in the Bible, really has done that for myself, and I think for a lot of us. And I think that the psalmist must have been older when he or she wrote this, because it's this imagery of the small little amount of light that is sort of down along the path that would only throw enough light for the next step on the path. As a young man, I part of this journey of the death of my father has been me looking back at my ministry and my life and all of the different things that I have said and done in my life. And I'm just beginning it. I have always been a digital person, and so I have gone back through all of my computers that were laying on the floor without charging the batteries, and all the many disk drives that I've been moving files to along the way, and then reloading them on my computer. Almost 30 years, 3 decades of messages I have found. I actually found in my files a handwritten notebook from my 10 years in Italy with handwritten messages in Italian, with ink faded. Some of it I can read, some of it I can't read. I'm going to have to work on that translation and figure out what I said over those years. I kind of have an idea. But as I have looked through literally hundreds of messages, literally hundreds of blog posts, letters, all kinds of things, I realized that when I was younger and preaching, I was preaching with a huge amount of perhaps put on authority and certainty about God, about this path that I was on, and about where that path was going to lead and how safe it was going to be. I was preaching as if, rather than carrying a little oil lamp that showed me the next step, like one of those spotting flashlights that you use for deer when you're hunting deer illegally at night. None of you know what those are, of course. You know, there's these huge floodlights that just illuminate, you know, like football fields. They just illuminate everything. No way you could miss a divot in a field like that, along a path like that. And so as I look back on how I understood spirituality, how I understood God, how I understood what the Spirit of God was going to do in my life and for my life, you know, it's just clear, just going to be great. Everything's going to be rosy and wonderful. Not going to hit any trips or bumps along the way. And as you all know, that's just not the way it works, right? You know, we want a floodlight. That's the Word of God. We want a floodlight from the Spirit of God that just sort of shines all the way to the very end so that it's just a straight path. When we were in Italy and people would ask us directions, we would say sempre dritto, which means just always go straight. Maybe it's similar in Spanish, I don't know. Sempre dritto. Where do you go? Sempre dritto. E poi take a left. The path is clear. Well, if you've ever been in a Sicilian town, it ain't nothing straight. Twists and turns and cobblestones and all those kinds of things. So, you know, as a young man, I was a preacher and missionary and whatnot. I thought, you know, this whole journey would be a floodlight event, but it's just not, right? It's just not. And the best that we can hope for is kind of what the psalmist puts here. That God's presence, God's things, God's matters, God's direction. You know, there's a promise there, and the promise is it's always going to be enough for the next step. And maybe one more, but that's about it. And so somehow in this journey, we have to get to the place where we embrace that, you know, and we trust that, and we don't feel despair because we don't know the whole way, we don't know the whole journey, because it was never supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be a walk of discipleship. You know, Jesus said, you know, come and follow me. And they didn't know where Jesus was going or what Jesus was going to be doing. They certainly didn't think that it was going to end up in a cross, him dying, and just sort of the whole thing just sort of going. Can you do that in church? I could have done it outside and nobody would have been bothered. But you know, life just sometimes just goes like that. And when it does go like that, this song, I think, can be, you know, great comfort. You know, God's presence, it will be enough to light the next step out of the. And a lot of you are nodding, you know. Martha. But I went to her house. What she's doing, you know? What's the next step? Write cards. They bought her a chair and a little coffee table. It turns into a desk. I think Alden was the culprit of that, maybe, right, Paul? Yeah. And there she is, writing cards. The next step. I was like, Martha, what are you doing? I'm writing cards. Look, I can stand up. I was like, Martha. And, you know, just taking the next steps. And that's just what we do. We just take the next step. And I think that living with that attitude is more honest, I think, as Christians, as followers of Jesus. It is, I think, more accessible to people, right? More true to the way the world and life really works. Certainly something much more easy, I think, to carry along the way, and to share with people. I don't know how this is going to turn out either, but I do believe and know and experience that, God's going to help you the next step. And that can be so comforting, so helpful, in the midst of grief and pain and trauma and confusion and uncertainty in our lives. I have been talking a lot about lately the Barna study, and it was a study of about 1,500 youth. Questions that they're asking themselves and each other, the uncertainty about future. What does the future mean? What does the future bring? What is God saying and doing, or is it all here in the midst of all that? And it's definitely something that the youth, you young people, or I would imagine, are working with. But we're working with it too, trying to figure it all out. And we have a whole group of youth that are getting together at the National Youth Conference. The Rocky Mountains, going back to the YMCA in the Rocky Mountains, where it all began. And the theme, our very own Tyson Hall. I'm hoping he's here today. Is Tyson around? Hiding up there with his shirt. There he is. Come on down, Tyson. Come on down. Tyson Hall and others have been planning this, what I know is going to be an incredible youth conference in the Rockies. The theme is a light within us, and the whole theme is from Matthew 5 about carrying our light. And they're going to go and they're going to be talking about things. They're going to be hearing messages, I'm sure, that are much better than the ones I've been preaching to you, because the truth of the matter is, youth conferences are the best conferences in the world. They have incredible bands, awesome speakers that do silly, stupid things up on stage and preach these incredible messages under the stars. And so we are going to move here to the commissioning of the folks that are going to that conference here in a little bit. But as you go, and as you go to ponder more of what it means to have this light within us, I just want to add, think about as you're there and you're carrying your light to other persons, whether young or old, really, because there's going to be old people there too, like myself, just loving things. I'm not going, by the way, but I would love to have gone. But as you carry your light and carry your hopes and carry your dreams and carry your experience of God, just remember that that is an intimate, tender thing for most of us. And my prayer is just that as you go, that God will give you, if you're nervous about what you're going to do or say or what that whole experience is going to be like, just know that God's going to be with you. God's going to be lighting your steps, lighting your path through that whole experience, and it is going to be marvelous. It is going to be wonderful, and when you look back on it, you will be able to say, God was with us the whole way.